Hi everyone. In this video, I'm going to walk you through getting started in your first Rails app. As you know, one of the books for this class is Agile Development with Rails 7. And this is a book that's freely available to GVSU students through the GVSU library. Or well, more specifically, through the library, you can get a free account to the O'Reilly website here and then read these books. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk through the building an application section of the book where they build the shopping depot app. And although I think the book does a pretty good job of walking through this process, I'm going to do it here on the video as well. One, so that you can see what things look like when they go right. Or if I goof up, you'll also see what some things look like when they go wrong. And I also think it would be helpful if I went into some more details on a few of the steps along the way. And so I'm going to be building this app in an online environment called Code Anywhere. Now, that's certainly not necessary. You could almost certainly follow this process on your own machine, but I'm going to do this for two reasons. One, so that there is a common space available to anybody. So if you have trouble with your own machine, you always have a choice of coming to Code Anywhere, and then you're working in precisely the same environment I am. Now, Code Anywhere is not free, but it's not terribly expensive either. I believe it's less than $10 a month, and you would only need it for a month or two. And the other reason I'm going to do this is because I've heard that Rails development in Windows can be a bit difficult at times. And since I don't use Windows unless I absolutely have to, if you get stuck on your Windows machine, I'm not going to be able to help as much as I'd like to. All right, so we'll start from a blank Code Anywhere account, and then we'll create a space. So when you create the space, you can either start from one of your own GitHub repositories, or you can start from one of their templates. And I get the impression their templates are similar to like a predefined Docker container that you might start a Docker project from. So if we're going to work on Ruby on Rails, I'm going to choose Ruby. We'll just start on the main branch, no reason not to. I think VS Code is the way to go here. And then I'll call this Ruby Depot example. And the default environment here is plenty. No reason to pay for anything more powerful. And now we wait. All right, so for purposes of making the video, I'm going to quickly adjust the font sizes. And then I'm also going to change the color theme to be a little easier to see in the video. All right, and now on my Mac, Control backtick opens the terminal. I don't think this did what I want. Let me try this one more time to go to settings. It says 16, let's try 18. Okay, and then a quick sanity check. We'll say Ruby version 3.3.5 is a little old, but we're not doing anything leading edge here, so we'll just go with it. And then the other thing we need is we need to install Rails. And I bet most of you just noticed a quirky edit here. So what I said in class originally was, I don't think there's going to be a big difference between using Rails 7, which is what the book uses, and Rails 8, which is the current version. It turns out there is one detail that might be a small hiccup, and that is the automatic deploy system that Fly.io uses has not quite caught up to Rails 8 yet as of February 2025. So to avoid that difficulty for those of you who want to use the Fly.io to deploy your apps, I suggest installing Rails 7.2. And then once you have Rails installed, you can use the Rails gem to set up the shell of a new Rails app. When you do that, I suggest explicitly specifying that you want to use Rails 7.2. Now, this is only highly important if you've also installed Rails 8. If Rails 7.2 is the only version on your system, then the command will obviously use Rails 7.2. If you've already installed Rails 8, because that's what I told you to do last week, then you will definitely want to specify Rails 7.2 if that's the version you want to use. All right, now pardon my bad cut back to the original video. Okay, so we do have the shell of a Rails app, and now we want to start making some content. Now, it is certainly possible and not even all that difficult to generate content by hand once you have this Rails shell set up. I wouldn't want to try to set all this up by hand. If you're starting a new Rails app from scratch, you almost certainly have to run the Rails new program. But it is an optimization that's actually quite nice to use, so I'm going to follow along with the book and do that. Okay, so the first thing I need to do is change into the directory for the new project, and then we'll run the generator. So the command for all of the different things Rails does for you is bin Rails, and the particular command we're using here when we want Rails to generate some code for us is generate. There's lots of different things that Rails can generate. So this particular feature where we're going to generate the model view and controller around the CRUD operations for a specific database table, or what you hear sometimes called a specific resource, is called scaffold. And then to use the scaffold, we need to describe the name of this resource, which is product. And then we use a special Rails syntax to describe what the properties of that product are. Effectively, what are the columns that are going to be in the product table. And that form will be the name of the column, like title, followed by the type. In this case, string. So then I'll also quickly add the other columns we're going to start with. All right, and then if we come up here to the app directory, we can look in controllers and see that we now have a products controller. And if we look in the models, we have a product model. And if we look in the views, we have a products directory with some different pieces of the view that I'll go through in a minute. Furthermore, if we come back up to the controllers and I look at the products controller, we can see that it has even written some of the controller code for us. Again, I'll go through that in more detail in a minute. This isn't everything we need, but it has added a few things that pretty much every resource will need, so it saves you a few keystrokes. And then the other thing to notice that it did is if you come down to the database folder and look in migrate, it's created this file here. It says create products, because that's what we're doing, is we're creating the products table. And out here, this is a timestamp. If you look at it carefully, you'll see it says 2025-0207 and then a timestamp. And so, in fact, this timestamp is in UTC. So in UTC, it is early morning on February 7th. If we look at that, we have a little Ruby domain-specific language, a little setup here with some method calls that are describing what it means to create a table called products. And if you remember the command we just ran, we have the names of the columns here: title, description, URL, image URL, and price, and then their types over here. So our next step is to apply the migration. And when you're using Rails, any changes you want to make to the database should go through this migration process. You're not going to just fire off some SQL and go touch the database directly. You want to do it all in a coordinated manner through the processes that Rails have set up. One of the reasons for that is if you go through the process and you get a migration for every change you make, then if you need to set this up in a new environment, you now have those migrations that are the series of steps to initialize the database in the new environment, whether that's another dev environment for another developer or the production environment itself. And another thing you get is the ability to roll the database forward and backward. A little more advanced than what we're going to do today, but in a production environment, that ability can be a lifesaver if something weird happens. All right, so the command to apply that migration is Rails db:/migrate. Now we have to do this explicitly because right now all we have is a file that's describing what we want to do to the database. We haven't done it yet. The DB migrate is what's going to make this actually happen. And so when it's complete, you'll see this schema RB file, and if you open it up, another Ruby-esque idiomatic domain-specific language here describing the contents of that table. You'll see two additional fields here. Every row in the table will also have a created at and updated at field. Okay, in general, to launch the server, you would say bin rails server. But because we put Tailwind in here, because we're doing some extra CSS stuff, there's actually multiple steps that need to happen. Rails helps you out by setting up a script for you. So in this case, we're going to launch the server by saying bin dev. And what that will do is it'll get any Tailwind pieces running that need to run, and then it will launch the server. That server is running on port 3000. On your own machine, you would just say localhost 3000. I'm not on my own machine. I'm on Code Anywhere, so I have to find the IP address of this machine. And that URL you'll use is in the Code Anywhere ports tab right next to the terminal. So let's copy that, paste it into the clipboard, and see our wonderful app. All right, now, if you're running locally, hopefully you did see your wonderful app. I did want to show this intentionally. In Code Anywhere, there's one more step you need to use, and that is you need to add this to your configuration. I actually don't fully understand why, but at least Rails is kind enough to tell you exactly what the problem is. Where you need to add that is in the config folder, inside environments, in a folder called development.rb. So this is your configuration for your development environment. We'll paste that in there. And when I do that, I'm actually going to have to restart the server. Most of the time, when you're working in this development environment, you don't have to restart the server when you make changes to your models and views and controllers. Running bin dev sets up a watcher, and it watches for things to change and brings in those changes. Also notice when you first launch a server, sometimes Code Anywhere catches that and says, hey, do you want to just open that in the browser? So that can be a nice shortcut as well. But since I already have this here, I'll come up here and I'll reload. And there's our app. Now we created a resource called products, but we don't have any products yet. So the page is there. There's just nothing to show in it. All right, so let's create a new product. Now, what should our product be? How about, I'll try passing on the image URL for now. And 1995 is not too much for a pie. So we'll create the product. We can see what we're creating. We can go back to our list of products. And there we go. Okay, so now at this point, I'm going to walk through the details of the code that Rails generated specifically for this resource, the model view controller pieces for this resource. This is going to get a little bit long, and most of you probably won't need to watch all of this. But I do want this explanation here for those who are more comfortable with those extra details. So feel free to turn up the speed and skip around and just grab those pieces you need to make you a little more comfortable with the framework. So remember, Rails is built around this model view controller design pattern, where the model is the data and the business logic surrounding the data. The view is what's drawing the web page for us, and the controller is directing traffic, so to speak. And because this is a web app, the way a user tells the web app what he wants done is through a URL. So we visit the web page with a specific URL. So like in this case, to see my list of products, I use the path products. The other thing that scaffold command did was it set up the routes for us. It set up a mapping between the path, like products, and the code that should run in response. This is always a little bit tricky to get to work, but let's give it a shot. I'm going to make my terminal nice and big here, and I'm going to run bin, rails, routes. That's a program that will show us all the routes. And you'll see that there's a lot of routes here that we're not going to do anything with. But let's find the routes for our particular resource. And they're here at the top. So let's look at this one. You see here in the middle, the path. So slash products, that's what we have right here, maps to a particular controller method. So in this case, the index method in the products class. And you'll see some other patterns here. So for example, if I have a pattern of products followed by just a generic pattern named ID here, that's going to go to the show method of the products controller. All right, so let's see what's going on. We'll close these out. We'll go back to our apps, controllers, the product controller. This is sort of the traffic director, the center of it all. So remember that routes table said when the path is slash products, we run the index method in the product controller. And what did that index method do? It called the all method on the product model. The all method on the product model, it returns an array with one product object for each row in the database. At this point, there is only one row in the database, the one we just created. That list of products is put in an instance variable named products. And then we get into some more Rails magic. When we get to the end of a controller method, if we haven't told it to do anything different, it's going to jump over to the corresponding view. So if we look in the views folder inside of the products folder, so there'll be a folder named for each controller, there happens to be a file named index.html.erb. Notice it has the same name as this method. So this is a classic example of convention over configuration. By convention, at the end of a controller method named index, we are going to go render a view named index. And we see some Tailwind code in here. I'm going to skip that for now. What else do we have going on? So here is the div that's going to actually be our list of products. There is an if statement. All right, so there's the if statement. There's the else. So if you remember, when we first visited this page, it said no products found. The view did that. The view had this embedded Ruby, this embedded logic in it that said if there aren't any products, then this is what we're going to render, just the no products found message. Once we do have products, there's the loop. So we're going to iterate over that list of products. And then it says render product. Render is the way of saying use a helper view. So if I say render product, it's going to go find what we call a partial. And you can tell it's a partial because it begins with an underscore. So it's looking for the file called product.html.erb. And so this is the code that displays the title and the description in the image URL and the price, along with a bunch of styling. Now we certainly could have copied this and pasted it right into this spot of the view. What's some more Rails magic that we should take a look at? Let's come back over to the routing table. All right, remember this button here that says new product? We click on new product. We come to this path. So product/new, and then there's the form here for us for a new product. How about excellent mashed potatoes? I guess I'm thinking about Thanksgiving today. Don't know why. All right, there's our mashed potatoes. So look here at our routing table. So there's that path we're looking at, products new. That was what was in the navigation bar when we clicked the button. This path also has a name. You see the prefix here. It has a name, new product. So in the view, when we want to create a link or a button to that particular route, we can reference it by name. So we're creating a link to the new product path. And why is it new product? Because right here in the routing table, we've given that particular route a name. There's something similar happening down here. Let's come over here and go back to the products. There's a link here that says show this product. We can see it here. We can see it down here for the mashed potatoes. And when we click on it, we go to that show route, which is products followed by an ID. But through the magic of Rails, through that convention over configuration, if I link to and then I just give it a product object, Rails figures out the type of that object, that it's a product, and goes and looks up the show route for that resource. That would be this one right here. Now, at this point, I'm going to guess that some of you are feeling quite intimidated. There's a lot of stuff that just works, and it's not too bad to figure out what's going on by looking at it, but to know what all of this magic is certainly takes a lot of practice, a lot of repetition. But to know what this magic is, to know what to type in, you just have to pick it up by writing lots and lots of Rails code. So this is what I meant earlier when I said there's a steep learning curve. Once you've done enough Rails to know what all these shortcuts are, you can get through new resources very, very quickly, but not on your first Rails project. Okay, let's go back to the controller. Let's see what else the controller does for us. So we've seen the index route. The show route is what shows us the details of a specific product. So like when I click show this product. It has no code in it. Are you serious? Right? Talk about lots and lots of convention. So we already know part of what's going on here is that this is just going to get to the end of this apparently empty method and run show.html.erb. So it's going to run this template to render the details of the product. Let's see what else is here, right? We have the details of the product. And then we have these three links that look like buttons: edit, back to products, and destroy this product. And we have that same usage of the named route. So we have a link to, we'll reference what we want, like the edit route by name, edit product path. See, we got a name right here. If we want to go back to the list of all products, that's the second button. There's the products path. There's the name. And then there's a button that makes delete happen. There's a little more subtlety involved in that. We'll cover that a different day. But you might have noticed something a little funny here. This is rendering the product. So there's our instance variable product with the product in it. But wait a minute. Where's that instance variable getting set? That's coming from this up here. So this has a class method called before action. This is saying before running any of the methods down here, call the setProduct method. So what is this doing? It's grabbing that ID out of the parameters, out of the path. So if we look here, see we have products 1. And if you look at the route to show products is products:ID. There's a placeholder for that second component. Notice this is also called ID here. So this params.expectID is what's going into that path, finding the component of that path marked as a placeholder named ID and grabbing that value. By saying expect here, I believe what's happening is if that component is missing, it'll raise an error of some kind. But because it's there, it returns that value. And then here is a static method on the product model that's returning the row in the database with the chosen unique ID, and it's just assigning that to product. So although it doesn't appear that the show method is assigning that at product instance variable, this little hookup here is taking care of that for us. Now, personally, I would probably just call set product on my own. I think it makes the code a little easier to follow, but it is the Rails way. And the other thing here is it's only doing that for certain actions, for show, edit, update, and destroy. All right, we don't get a single product for the index, so we're not going to run that. Okay, now we can take a look at new. So let's see what's going on here. New is how we create that new product and we get that form and so on. All right, so we have a product class that describes a row in the product table. So it has the properties of that table, the title, the description, and so on. Now, when we call methods like all or find, what that static method does is it goes into the database and it creates product objects to describe the appropriate rows in the database. If I just create an object, if I say just give me a new product, that object is not yet associated with the database. It's just a container with the fields for a new product. So this effectively here is an empty product. And we're going to render the form, and we're going to pass as a parameter that product. Remember, the render means a partial, so we're looking for a partial named form. That's form.html.erb. And this is setting up the form. And of course, Rails has all sorts of helpers for this. What you'll see here is the Rails function form with, and you give it a product. So then, through the magic of Rails, I'll put a label in the form. You'll notice there's a title field, a description field, an image URL field, and these built-in Rails methods then generate the appropriate HTML. In this case, these fields will all be empty because the product we passed it is empty. All right, so if we go back to the main view called new, there's also a link to go back. Following convention, when that form is submitted, it will do a post to the create route. So let's look at our routes table again down here. If we do a post to products, that's what calls create. So there's the create method over here. So the first thing we will do is we will create a new product based on those post parameters. So we'll take the data out of the form, it gets sent into the controller here, and we create a product object. Again, we haven't put this into the database yet. We just have an object holding the title, the description, and so on. All right, product params. Where's that coming from? This is actually a method call. So remember, the parentheses on method calls in Ruby are optional. So that can be a little bit misleading sometimes, but this is a method call. It's a private method down here, and it's extracting those parameters from the post data. Again, we're using this expect method there so that the system will raise an error if something is missing. All right, so now we have an object describing that new product we want to describe, right? In this case, our mashed potatoes. And what we're going to do is we're going to try to save it. So when you call the save method on a model, that's when that data actually gets pushed out to the database. It gets pushed out and it creates a new record. Now, save will return true or false. So if it returns true, then what we're going to do is we're going to redirect to that show route for the product. If we fail to save it, for example, if a required field is missing or something like that, then we're going to re-render the new page, the form. All right, so it's setting a flag of some kind. And we don't have enough details in this part of the example to dig into this further, but we will get to it a couple more steps down the road. The brief but incomplete answer is that if the product is not able to save, then the code that's checking to see if it's valid or not will have set a property on the product describing the error. So if we look at the form, that form is going to detect that there are some errors, and it'll just display messages for those errors. Again, that's not something for this week. That we'll see details of in coming weeks. All right, let's look at the controller. Update is effectively the same thing as new. Basically, the only difference is that the form is pre-populated. So if I want to edit a product, well, let's do that. Let's come over here and we'll edit the cherry pie product. It's the same form, it's just pre-populated with the existing data, right? This pie is really good. It's worth more than $19.95. And then we'll update the product. So we have the edit route, which is showing the form, but it's pre-populating the form with the data that's already there. And then when you submit the form, it does an update. So it calls the update method on the product instead of the save method, which pushes it out to the database. And we'll either see the product if that was successful, or we'll go back to the form with some error messages if it's not. If we want to delete a product, we'll call the destroy method. Notice the exclamation point because that's a destructive operation. So that pretty much walks through everything that the app does at this point. I hope that if you've gone through this and you've listened to the video bit by bit, I know it's a long video, probably a little too much for one sitting. You'll see how the pieces fit together. You'll see where the Rails magic comes in, and you'll see a decent amount of what makes the magic work. I certainly did not explain all of the magic, but I hope I explained enough to make this a lot less intimidating than it was at the beginning. It'll certainly be intimidating for a while yet, but I hope we've got a good step in the right direction. One thing we didn't take a look at all was in the models. So if we look at the product model, there's nothing there. Notice it inherits from a parent class called application record. That's where all the magic happens that adds the properties that are the columns in the database and so on. So the product class has all of those methods to get data in and out of the database, but it doesn't have any logic around the product. It doesn't have any validation, things that say, for example, a product has to have a price that's greater than 0. That will come to in a different week, and that's what we'll start filling out this class. All right. You've got to have had enough for one sitting, so I will wrap up this video at this point, and we'll pick up again later with the next set of features.